Oh boy, we are here with the Steven Cimino Says Boom podcast, issue 12, our annual episode.
Boom!
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Steven Cimino Says Boom podcast, issue 12, our annual issue. Some people can't believe we made it. I can't believe we made it. I'm your host, John Cimino, with our co-host.
And my name's Steve Houston. Boom!
Boom. And we have our man from the grotto at the bottom of the auto, our technical guy and our third musketeer. Otto?
Yeah. Good to see everybody. I can't believe I hung around. I can't believe you guys let me stay for 12 issues. I mean, in the original issue, when we had Roy Thomas on episode 8, I screwed up. I thought Steve was going to wring my neck out through the video camera.
Unfortunately, I began walking all the way to the East Coast, but I got tired. So you're lucky.
I bet you did. I bet you did. And also, guys, please, as always, comment, share, like, subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. You're watching this, and we hope you enjoy it. We've had great content, and thank you to John and Steve for putting this together, and all our special guests, including for this special issue. John, what issue is this?
This is issue 12, our annual, and of course, we got the legend Roy Thomas, but we're going to have a little surprise that hasn't been done in a podcast ever before. A little quick cameo by the very elusive, the very beautiful, the majestic Dan Thomas.
Congratulations, Steve, Otto, John, on the 12th edition, and I hope we're all around to see the 1200th edition.
Who's this woman?
Great, bye.
We got Dan Thomas, her first. She's like the J.D. Salinger of comics, and we got her. And on our 12th issue, believe me, I had to work hard on the field for that, right,
Yes,
Roy?
yes,
Roy's
right,
going to be getting the beating later on. I might survive. But so on our 12th annual issue, we have the legend Roy Thomas here. And I just like to tell people really quickly, make sure to pick up this by Mike Avella, the creating Marvel's legendary Wolverine. And it's probably one of the best told exactly the way it was, right, Roy? Of how Wolverine was created. Endorsed by the man himself, Mike Avella. Pick this up anytime. We're just showing that because it's a great book. Wolverine creating Marvel's legendary mutants. Okay, Steve, we are here at issue number 12. Last time we had Roy on issue 8, it was, I think, right?
Seems like only yesterday.
Seems like only yesterday. It was great. Steve, take us away, Steve. You're the guy that starts this thing going, and you're the guy with the true knowledge that fanboys need to hear.
Well, again, it's a real honor, and we had such a good reaction to issue number 8. A lot of people love getting into the weeds. Now, of course, I can, also bring up some of my favorite stuff that I loved from Roy. Material that not only did I love, but it changed my life in many ways in regards to collecting and what I was doing. And I'm looking forward to getting into that today. But also, we had a previous issue with Mr. Steve Englehart. And Steve was dropping some first-hand knowledge, and I am looking forward to getting some verification today on some of the stuff that was said. And I'm particularly interested about one subject in particular, and that is the arrival of Steve Englehart on Captain America. So that's where I want to begin today.
All right. First, I have to apologize if you hear an occasional bit of my dogs barking in the background. They're a particularly unruly crew.
Can you hear them? Can you guys hear them?
A little bit, but it's okay.
Well, I can't hear them.
I don't think it'll come through the glass that
Yeah.
much. They'll calm down after a little while. It's the Hound of the Baskervilles out there,
It's okay.
I can
very minor.
can do that, you know, that isn't going to cause an eternal eruption between me and between Steve and me. It'd be fine. Steve Englehart, not Steve Houston.
Yeah.
So
either one.
So go ahead, Steve. What did you want to ask, Roy?
So obviously,
because I saw the episode, so you know, so I'm vaguely familiar with it. You know,
it's definitely a fascinating period in time. One is, now, if I'm correct here, according to my research, on the Captain Americas, issue 153, Steve Englehart comes on board. Okay, that is September 1972. You know. Yeah. In September 1972, you have just become the editor, the man. Okay.
No, I was the boy. Stan was the man. I might be editor in chief, but I'm still the boy to him.
Well, I could never think of you as the boy. It's just not going to work that way. To me, you're going to be the man. So we talked with Steve, and I'm completely enamored with that first story arc that he did, where he delved into this history of the 1954 Captain America, brought it back in, an incredible story. And as you mentioned before, in issue 8, you know, Captain America had sort of been floundering in sales that hadn't, you know, struck a chord. And suddenly Steve comes along and he's like firing on all 4 cylinders. And I was astonished to learn, and what he told me was, it wasn't his original idea. It was something that you suggested to him. So I want to use this opportunity to, you know, find out, where did you get that idea from? How come you mentioned it to him?
Well, I've always been a, you know, continuity freak, or, you know, if they want to use that term or whatever. And
Steve is too. We are
right.
too. Otto is too.
In various ways. I mean, you don't have to be slavish with it, but, you know, my feeling about continuity in comic books, and this comes from being a kid right on through, was that if the people who are writing and drawing the comics don't care enough to keep to make the feeling of that this is a person's life, even if it's a super character's life, then why should the reader care about it? If you know, it used to bother me as a kid when Batman would fight a Martian, and he did occasionally, even before the 60s, even, you know, and back during my day when I was a kid, and Superman would fight a Martian, and they'd be different Martians, like there's no connection between them. It, you know, it wasn't a universe. These were guys who knew each other. They appeared together on the cover of World's Finest Comics, and they'd been in at least one good issue of All-Star together. And yet somehow or other, you know, they were obviously living in different universes, you know, even if they shared stories occasionally or in World's Finest. So I like the idea. That was one of the reasons why I became so enamored. Julie Schwartz's comics had some of that, but it didn't really splash over for the most part to the rest of DC. But Stan, because of his being the accident, really, in a sense of his being the writer and the editor of most of the books and controlling them all, his brother was originally writing some of them, you know, too. That he didn't have to make a conference or make a big deal, you know, to get some continuity and so forth. So he just, you know, he was writing or controlling all the stories in varying degrees, and he just felt like he had this sense, and Julie Schwartz had it too, to some extent, that if the world was this was going to be a real world, a real universe, then you know, it had to be fairly consistent, and, you know. So and one of the things about Captain America had been that I liked the idea. See, first I had written Stan a letter right. I don't know if it was right before or after. I think it was even before that issue in which the Acrobat pretended to be Captain America, a couple of months before Avengers #4.
Yeah, Strange Tales 114.
And I wrote a letter to Stan, whom I really didn't write letters. I didn't write nearly as many letters to Marvel as they did to Julie Schwartz at DC in those days. But I wrote a letter saying you should bring Captain America back, you know, like, because the Torch and Submariner were back in one form or another. But I said, make it be Bucky, you know, because he's grown up or something like that. Wow. You know, turn Bucky, because, you know, I was assuming, you know, that maybe he's had super serum. I wasn't thinking that far ahead, but, and I think I got a letter back from Stan, one of my few, saying that, well, you know, we have other plans, but you'll see soon. And, you know, a few weeks later, Avengers #4 comes out.
Wow.
Fine. And I like that. I thought it was very ingenious, this whole idea of he's frozen in ice.
Wow.
But it offended my sense of continuity, although not the Marvel continuity, because, you know, they didn't really count over with Timely at that stage. But it still offended me in a certain sense because I knew that 1945 to 1949, for another 3 to 4 years, there was a Captain America comic with Bucky in it too, most of the time. He got knocked out the last few issues in favor of Sun Girl, but and not only that, but then in 1953, all of a sudden, here's Steve Rogers as a teacher and Bucky as one of the students, and they come out of retirement to fight the Red Skull, who's gone from being a Nazi to being a commie. He'll be a Rotarian.
Yes.
But anyway, and I love those stories, set in the post-Korean War period, the very anti-commie stories and all that. I love that stuff. And so I always liked the idea of doing something about that, but I never really had the opportunity to do anything like that in Avengers, because of Captain America, even when he was in it, was only one of a number of characters. And I didn't really want to write the Captain America book. So when I assigned Steve, that's about the same time. Did he start doing Avengers and Captain America about the same time?
Yes, basically.
Avengers, when I became editor.
Yeah, he basically started. You become editor of Avengers in issue 103.
Yeah.
And as far as I remember correctly, he starts like issue 107.
Okay.
What? Oh, well, yeah.
He starts writing.
Of Avengers, he started with number 105.
Okay, 105.
Yeah, but I did the first.
You became editor in issue 103.
That I remember. But I don't know about was he doing Captain America before? I don't think he was doing Captain America before he was doing Avengers. Was he? Was a month or two later or about the same time? Do you know? It's pretty close in time.
I know he starts Captain America just before.
Okay, well, yeah, it doesn't make that much difference. So the main thing is, Steve had been writing, I guess, The Beast and so forth, doing a good job of it. And,
yes.
And it was time for a bigger assignment and everything like that. I had to give up stuff. And, the top writers, were at the very top writers and so forth. But Steve was entering that category quickly. Jerry Conway. I don't know how much Len was doing at the time. We're trying to get him over. Marv was, about to come over and things like that, and a few other people. So I was trying to get a good group of people. I was hoping would have liked to got Archie over. I never quite did. He came over right after I left. So I wanted to have Steve do Captain America. It seemed like a logical, good book for him to do. It needed some help, and he was a good writer and doing, and everything. So I made this suggestion. I thought, I don't know if I exactly insisted on it, but I just, pushed a little bit to do something with. Now, I don't remember, I know that my real idea, but maybe I didn't express it clearly. My real idea was for him to do something about that whole thing, the whole thing of 1945 to 49 and 53 to 54 in the same, but whether I made it clear or not, Steve decided to just take the 50s part of that. And he ignored the fact that there had been a Captain America from 45 to 49. He just made it a character that was, this, crazed super patriot kind of character. And it really, I'll tell you the truth, it really wasn't what I'd had in mind. I hadn't had in mind, making Captain America a crazed kind of villain. But, that was Steve's business. I didn't really care. I thought about, okay, if that's Steve's take on it, it doesn't affect me, because to me, I still love those 50 stories. And there's no connection to me between those 50 stories drawn so beautifully by Romita. My favorite work of his by far, by the way, not Spider-Man, is Captain America of that period. But, those stories were always going to be there, and it didn't make any difference what happened now, and so forth. So if Steve wanted to do that, he certainly did it very, very well. So, so I just kind of, let him go with it. It was encouraging. And, near the end, got a little nervous about it looking like he was fighting Nixon as the head of Hydra or something, but we kind of fudged that around. We sort of had to in a way, because, you think about it. Okay, so Nixon shoots himself in the White House or whatever. Well, whenever anybody happens, Nixon didn't shoot himself in the White House. So it was always kind of vague as to whether that was the president or wasn't the president. I figured, well, that's good enough. Yeah. And the lucky thing is that Stan, as the publisher, never really noticed, and everything too. I don't think he ever really complained, because he wouldn't have really been that wild about the idea of being so involved. He wouldn't have liked the idea of making it look like the president of the United States was the head of Hydra, shot himself in the Oval Office or something, But I don't think Stan ever noticed, so forth. So Steve got away with that, as he got away with, the God thing, you know, a few years later. But and he did make the book sell. Now, when he said the other some weeks ago that Captain America became, you know, I don't remember exactly, but you know, like Marvel's best-selling book. That's true in one sense, and that is he's talking. I assume he realized this. He's talking about percentage sales, meaning it sold a bigger. Now, obviously, it didn't have the print run of Spider-Man, so it wasn't selling as many copies of Spider-Man or FF or several other books, but it was selling a large percentage, and that's important. That's the major thing. The first time that really happened, I think, was when John Romita took over from Wally Wood, you know, one talent taking over from another great talent. And the book had been selling very well under Stan and Wally, and it immediately picked up. And within the 3 or 4 issues of the time that John was doing it, Daredevil became the highest percentage selling book, you know, again, with a lower print run because it hadn't been, you know, it was a new book and had a low print run. Captain America, I don't know. It wasn't like it was a low print run, but, you know, it wasn't one of the very highest, but it was in the middle range. They may have dropped it a little simply because it hadn't been selling as well. But it did pick up, and it suddenly had some of the best numbers around, and that showed that. And his Avengers did about, you know, at least about as well as mine. I'm kind of jealous about that, you know. And he did it with lesser artists, as Steve has said. It's true. As the editor, I saw to it. I worked with whoever I want. I had John, well, not always, but I had John Buscema and, you know, and Sal Buscema when he first came in, and, you know, other, you know, of course, you know, Neil when he came in and so forth. And Steve managed to pull off the same trick, but without quite the stellar talent. I don't mean they weren't talented, because he had Sal Buscema, whom I worked with too. But he had a couple other people, and they were good people. But he never had, you know, wasn't working with John Buscema, you know, or things like that. And he still managed to make it, you know, sell very well. So Steve was obviously, you know, a rising star and right up there with Jerry and the others.
Shows you back then a good story could still sell the book, you know, if you think about that, like a good, honest to God story.
And if Steve wanted to tell a different story than what I had originally had in mind, that didn't really bother me as long as it was good and it sold comics, you know. That's all I cared about. I hated to see Captain America do that in a way, but, you know, but the readers loved it. My job was to sell comic books, and I think Steve did an excellent job of it. And he went on to other good things after that.
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, so, you know, it's definitely a fascinating aspect in the you know, these last couple of you know, months now that, you know, we got to speak with Steve and now you, and those questions have been in my mind for an eternity. You know,
you just call me. Don would have given you my number. I saw you in Vegas. You could ask me then.
Yeah, but there's so many. We only touched the surface of what, you know, I want to talk to. So every now and again, I'll get some clarity. But, you know, now that we've had Steve Englehart here, I also want to stress the fact you're a continuity freak. You're a continuity nut. Okay, and that is essential. Okay, if you're going to be an editor, you better know who, what, why, and when. When you handed off that task to Steve Englehart, he was also a continuity freak, a nut, and he got more and more complicated as it goes on. And that's why I want to stress to anyone who is watching this podcast right now, it had to be someone of that quality. If you had handed it over to someone that hated the product, had only read 3 issues, didn't know what the Captain America was, everything would have fallen and it would have faltered. And you would have had to replace Steve in 2 minutes, okay, with someone else. However,
probably
looking back here, you know, we have an example of an editor just making a suggestion and then getting out of the way and allowing Steve to do what he wants to do, and sales rise. You know, we have heard many stories of people coming in and, you know, being heavy-handed, you know, oh, you can't do this and do that. But, you know, when we look at the history of the titles, the writing, becoming an editor, and then transitioning off to different people, you know, that period, 1972-73 for Marvel, wow.
Crazy. I agree.
It's a crazy era. You know, you have that initial burst with Stan and Jack and, you know, and Steve, the initial burst. But even by, let's face it, by 1969, that initial burst, sort of the balloon was dropping a little bit. You know, Doctor Strange had to be cancelled. Nick Fury, was cancelled. There was time for new blood. And so to hear those original stories from these people, okay, who came in, under your tutelage, basically, Jerry Conway, the Steve Englehart.
Well, I hate to hear that word tutelage because I didn't teach them very much.
Well, I mean, sponsorship, shall we say, bringing
okay,
in.
all right.
It's definitely an important thing, and they were able to create the classic stories later on that we got today. So definitely the Captain America story was definitely at the forefront of my mind of what leaving someone alone can do.
Steve, beautifully said. And this is something I always wanted to ask Roy, because his run was the next spark, and it, like, all those other great legendary characters come. But this is what I want to ask Roy, and I don't think this has ever been asked of Roy. Obviously, you started hiring people that all truly became legends too. They followed you. Now, you had an eye for detail. So, I mean, you even had a hand with Denny O'Neil, maybe talking to Stan about it and doing it.
Yeah.
But then you bring in all these other guys. We just talked about Steve Gerber previously. Yeah. We talked about David Anthony Kraft, and the list goes on and on for you. Starlin, boom. They all became these huge legends. I want to ask you a question. When you looked at a writer and you saw what they did, what were you looking at that you knew that they had to? Where did that come from? Like, because you were almost 100% with these people, what did you look for in that you knew they were going to be something? I've never asked this.
I never read their stuff that carefully, They were literate people.
But how did you know?
They liked the comics. They seem to kind of understand, the comics.
Because even Stan didn't see what you saw, and
not always.
No, but that's what I'm saying is, like, how did you see these people you created and you Frankenstein monstered these guys into?
I think what it is they created themselves. I just kind of recognized them and benefited from it. But
what did you see? What did you see that you knew that they were going to be good?
Well, it was a little easier with that first batch, like Jerry and Len and Marv, maybe, especially.
Look at those three.
Because, and they are three of the big names to come out of that period, along with Steve, and so forth, and a couple of others. And they, but the thing is, they already had cut their teeth at DC. So I'd read a couple of their stories, and I sort of, and I could see that, they could write. And there's two things. One, they could just generally write comics. They already knew how to write it. Joe Orlando and Dick Giordano and a couple of others had sort of done my spade work for me in one sense. So, I didn't have to teach them how to write. I could teach somebody to some extent how to write. Because I'd been a teacher, and I could teach them edit, but I didn't have the time, A, and B, I didn't really have the ambition. I hated teaching so much when I was a teacher that I didn't want to spend time teaching people. I wanted people that could do it and everything. And it's not very fair because Stan spent a lot of time teaching me and I spent almost no time teaching anybody else. I wanted to get people that already knew kind of what they were doing. And my feeling was, if you found the right person, they've got the spark and they've got a talent and they're literate and they're interested in Marvel in the first place and they want to be there. It wasn't like, they might have also been happy being at DC. Like Len wanted to do Batman or whatever, but they were people who knew Marvel. They had been reading Marvel since pretty much the beginning, which at that stage was about a decade. And all I had to do was see, if they wanted to kind of get into that. And the nice thing is they already had a frame of reference. They had just in terms of writing, along with the art too, because some of them were partly artists, and certainly they paid a lot of attention to the art. But even in terms of just writing, they had two major frames of reference. In particular, they had Stan. I mean, you can't get any bigger than that at Marvel. Mm-hmm. And they had me, which was a lesser extent because it was still like I was kind of a, offshoot of Stan in a way, with a little of my own style. But I was trying to do the same kind of thing. So we weren't fighting each other. It was one kind of style that was kind of evolving. And I think, I just figured these people sort of know what to do. They may not do it right all the time. Neither did I. Neither did Stan. But the thing is, they knew what to try to do. They knew the kind of thing that Marvel was. And if I had some complained about it, or I didn't like a character, this and that, at least they'd understand where it was coming from, because they knew what Marvel had. They knew what Stan did. They knew what Jack did. They knew what Ditko had done. So all I had to do was kind of, a little more, not so much guidance, it's just kind of, inspire them a tiny little bit, and then just kind of keep out of the way. Once in a while, I had a clash or two with, with one or two of them and everything. But, it didn't mean that, I didn't respect their writing, and we usually got past it,
But you bring in like Gary Friedrich and
that was earlier.
Earlier. But I'm just saying, did you know he was going to be as good as he was going to be, or you just gave him a chance?
No, I didn't. I had no idea about Gary. Was my best friend since we were like in high school together, and met at the Palace Theater, and so forth, when I was maybe 16 or so, and he was 13, and we were best friends for many years, and we're still friends, at least, as close as we could be from the distance, and with his health problems, right up to the end when he died a couple of years ago. But I actually, the thing is, Gary was a different kind of writer. He wasn't the same as Steve and Jerry and Len and Marv and a couple of the other people that came in, because he was never as much of a Marvel fan and a comics fan as they were. He liked comics. He read them. He started reading them after I brought that copy of the first Green Lantern showcase in, and he liked Marvel, and he, and so forth. But he was never as much of a comics fan or cared about as much as I did. He sort of got into it because of me. I was the older guy, and so forth, and we hung around together. And he did a really good job writing. He wasn't as polished as the other guys, kind of, in a way, but he did some really good work. I mean, you can't fault the guy who came up with the idea for the motorcycle riding Ghost Rider. You can't say that, it wasn't like it was a minor accomplishment.
But Roy hiring like a murder's row of writers that just was consistently over and over. I mean, I know you downplay it, but I can't think of any editor that had as many.
Well, they all had, I think, with rare exceptions, they all had professional credits. Maybe David Kraft didn't, because he had mostly doing that fanzine on Otis Adelbert Klein. But even he was writing.
Right, but you still gave them a chance. And even I know Steve, Mr. Houston over here, loves Gerber. What
Gerber's experience was that he wrote to me and his, he knew me and my first wife Jeannie. Yeah. Mainly because he had served as the beard once when we dated. Jeannie's parents didn't like me at all. I'd had a goatee, and even when I shaved it, they still said I was a bearded bum, and they didn't want to grab me. I'd been a teacher, and that had no connection with anything. She's just a few years younger than me.
Roy Thomas is a bum.
So it's a view. And so one time I had Steve go over and pick her up because her parents didn't want me coming by. So Steve picked her up and turned her over to me. So he was the beard in that case. And I got to know Steve when he was in like junior high in University City, which is a suburb of St. Louis. And I was still living in Jackson, just about to become a teacher. And even when I became a teacher in the St. Louis, first it wasn't, but it was like 100 miles west. But then when I was a teacher in the St. Louis area, I was in the South. So we weren't like neighbors. He wasn't at my school or anything like it. And our age difference was about, 10 or so years.
Oh, is that much? Okay.
Yeah. Because I was a teacher and he's in junior high, and I'm 22 or so, And so, it's a little different, and so forth. And he had his several friends. But I used to go up to his house. Okay, I don't know if he got to come out of my place, but I went up to his house in University City and met his parents, and we'd have good talks and things like that. I was going to do that thing called Crudzine, and I shoved that over to him, and he did that. And I like Steve, and then I kind of forgot about him. The next thing he turned up on my radar was a few weeks after I moved to New York. First, and I was staying with Dave Kaler, who I'd gotten some work for doing Captain Atom and stuff at Charlton. He did a good job. And I was sleeping on a mattress on the floor, and then Denny came in around September, something like that. And wherever it was, and there was another mattress. So Denny's there for a while.
Isn't that crazy?
And then the next person to come to town really wasn't Gary. Somewhere in the middle there, Steve Gerber came to town because he graduated from the 8th grade, and his parents gave him a trip to New York as a present. So he wrote me because he knew I was in New York.
Wow.
And so he sleeps on a mattress for a week. Got to meet Stan. I took him in to meet Stan. So he met Stan, had a big, long conversation. It was going to be a couple of minutes, and he and Stan hit it off. And so he's talking to the guy at that time. He's 17, 18, years old. And then Steve goes off to, I think, well, that's the end of seeing him. You know, he's in St. Louis. I'm here. And we had almost no contact, maybe once or twice. I saw him, but of course he did. But I saw him back in St. Louis a time or two in a convention, and you know, and he helped me about the time I was getting ready to elope with Jeannie and everything. And but that was, you know, kind of a, you know, from a distance. We weren't close friends, but we were kind of friends. And then one day, Jeannie and I get this letter from him, and it's because he was working in advertising in St. Louis. I'm not sure exactly what he was doing, copywriting and different things. This is like 71, 72 before we split up, I guess somewhere in there. What time? When did Steve come to work for Marvel? But it's about that time.
About that time.
Yeah, he got there in 72.
Okay, so he's right. You know, so this is, of course, you know, it's a few months early, and he suddenly writes this letter. And what it basically, and actually, I think this is pretty close to a quote of one sentence. He says, "Help! I'm going crazy doing advertising." You know, I mean, as Jeannie said later, but we didn't know it was not necessarily a work-related illness. You know, Steve was always kind of crazy.
Yeah.
We loved him, you know, but he was crazy. So I said, well, you know, I knew he could write a little bit. He used to write these comics back when he was in junior high, and I first met him. He would, on some kind of paper that was somewhere between comic book paper and toilet paper, he had found it banned, I mean, you know, and he would draw these long stories with sort of stick figures. It was like the Legion of Superheroes on steroids. I mean, all the characters looked exactly alike, but they had a different symbol, and some sort of Legion of Superheroes name, and he would mail them to me, these 30, 40, 50-page stories, and I would kind of glance at them and send them back.
Talk about ambition.
And so forth. And he has a letter in I think the very first Alter Ego Letters column that when either Jerry or Ron Foss had it, there's a letter from Steve Gerber in there first, right off the bat. He had his own fanzine going right away, headline.
Wow.
See? Wow.
And then he dropped out of that to do this stuff. He was married by that time, you know, so he's trying to live, but he's just going kind of nuts. And so he came to, I think he arrived about right after Jeannie and I had separated, because I remember he went shopping for me. I was trying to improve my life, so I went out and bought a beanbag chair. You know, that's what you did in 1972 when you were newly separated. You went and got a beanbag chair and hoped for the best. You know? and Steve and I are walking along. He just arrived in town, and we call over this cab, and then suddenly we drag out this beanbag chair, and this guy is upset because we're trying to squeeze it in the back seat of his cab. You know? And so it would have been like late 72 when he finally showed up there. But Steve was just, you know, a wild man. You know, we had a few squabbles because of things he'd want to do, but he was a real talent, you know. But he was different. He was less of a commercial talent in the sense of, you know, knowing exactly what to do, sell comics, than say Len and Marv and Jerry and Steve. You know, he had his own little odd thing, and sometimes it sold comics, sometimes it didn't, but it was always going to be different.
Yeah.
And sometimes it would just drive me up a wall because I knew it wasn't going to sell. And one time Stan almost threw him out the window when he made up Thundarr, you know, and got DC.
Oh God, I
Steve came so close to getting fired that day, and I'm lucky that you want to hear that story?
Yeah.
Okay, well,
I love that.
Steve was around, unfortunately, to fill in any details. I think you'd remember this. He had made up, it was obvious that I guess it's Man Thing, was it? It was in Man Thing.
Yeah, it was in
Thundarr.
17.
Thundarr was just, I don't know, you reminded me vaguely of somebody. I couldn't think of who.
It was Superman.
I suddenly realized it was Superman. You know, like it was so close to Superman with a different name, which is kind of funny since the first guy sued by Superman was Wonder Man. But Steve didn't know that. But anyway, so Thundarr is Superman. And I saw this at some rough stage, or he told me about it, whatever it is. And I told him, Steve, I said, don't do this. It's too close. You got to change it a little more, you know, because I had done, you know, Squadron Sinister, but I didn't make it that close, you know. I said, you know, it's the last thing in the world Stan Lee wants to get, and that I want Stan Lee to get, is a nasty letter from DC. Forget about a lawsuit, just a letter from a lawyer or something, or a complaint. It would send him up a wall. And so I said, just, you know, change it a little more. Well, I was kind of careless because I, you know, was busy. And so I assumed that, you know, I'm a simple guy. I'm the editor-in-chief of the company. I've got this writer. He had been on staff, but he had narcolepsy, so he kept falling asleep. So we had to take him off staff and just have him freelance, right? And so I tell this guy what to do, you know, just not exactly what to do, just what not to do,
right?
And to try to change it. And he evidently if he made any effort to change, it certainly was not, you know, anything that I noticed. and I was kind of careless, so it kind of slips through. You know, I mean, it was like in the middle of the story. So it gets, you know, it gets into print. I don't know if it was the issue on sale or it was what we call the make ready, which was like the guts of the magazine, everything but the cover that came in about a week or two before the comic came out on sale. So it's way too late to, you know, change anything. And Stan sees it. I think I saw it about the same time, but Stan sees it, which is the important thing. And I mean, you know, I'm sure his wig, you know, just like that, you know. And he was so mad. He called Steve in and he raked him over the coals. I was lucky to escape. I sort of, you know, I told him, I said, I'm sorry. I said, I told him to change it. I thought he had changed it more, and he obviously didn't. But you know, it's my responsibility. Can't deny that. And he was a little teed off at me for letting that slip through. But on the other hand, the person he was really mad at, because I had talked to him about it and he knew what to do, and he'd been on staff for a while, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, Steve spent about 20, 30 minutes. They were not as pleasant as that hour that he had spent in 1965 with Stan. And he came as close as probably, you know, anybody ever did except me to being fired, you know, by Stan. But after that, I can't say Steve was really chastened, though, particularly, you know. You know, he just had his vision and he was going to do it, and he was just going to run into the powers that be, and if they didn't like it, you know,
that's Gerber.
He would only make certain changes.
Such a rebel, and all
you know. He once threatened to quit over the ending of some mystery story in a year or so in, because he was Jewish, not practicing particularly anything, but there was some kind of story in one of the black and white horror mystery books, and it ended with I don't know, it wasn't anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic, obviously, but he was talking about, it had to do with the old ways. It was almost like it's sort of in a hint, orthodoxy as opposed to changing with the world, and it's about the old ways having to change. And the way he worded it, I just felt like you're gonna, you know, offend some Jewish people with this.
Right.
I don't care what you think, you know, you so forth. I said you have to change that, you know, ending and soften it somewhat. You have to do that. And he said, and he said, well, I don't want to do that. I said, well, we're going to do it. He says, you're going to do it, you know, or, you know, if you don't, I'll change something and you won't like it because I don't even know what to say. You know, I'm not being Jewish. He says, well, what if I said I wasn't going to do it? I said, I'd say goodbye, you know. And he then saw that I was his friend. I respected him. I had hired him. And if he refused to make this change, I was going to fire his butt,
right. Well, yeah.
And we changed it a little bit, and you know, and everything. And I guess we remained friends more or less, you know, and everything like that.
Gerber
but he was a wild man.
Yeah.
You know,
oh my God.
To follow up on that, Roy, when you read a Gerber book, I was always amazed by his superior vernacular. And so sometimes I'd have to have a thesaurus and a dictionary, because I was like, what in the hell is he talking about? Because, you know, and I would always be educated by, you know, was he really that smart?
Oh, sure. We were all that smart. And Steve was as smart as any of us, you know? Yeah. And, you know, I think he might have been a teacher for a little bit too, but, you know, he's working advertising with words. He'd been reading comic books and everything else. I mean, you know, probably had a better, you know, formal education than I did or whatever. He was very smart.
Though he
had a little less sense about what words to use. I think the rest of us knew those words too. Maybe we knew enough not to maybe use quite as many of them in the same sentence, you know, unless we were writing the Beast. You know?
Otto, you got something?
I do. So I would love to know when I've talked about this before, the Sanctum Sanctorum. Am I saying that properly, Roy?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. The address, what was the address?
177A Bleecker Street.
Bleecker Street. And who was your roommate at the time? Was that?
Well, officially, my roommate was on Red Controls, we learned, was Gary Friedrich.
Gotcha. Okay.
Unofficially, a week or two after we moved into that Greenwich Village apartment, it was on Bleecker Street between McDougal and Sullivan. It's right in the heart of the village. This is really it, you know. It was the second floor, right above some sort of weird parlor they had there at the time, where it was like, it looked like a cotton candy machine, and people stuck their hands in it. They got paint on it, and then they did canvases. It was some stupid 60s thing. We're talking 1965, 66, you know.
Psychedelia.
It didn't last long, but it was down there. And there were motorcycles revving up all the time. Maybe that's where Gary got the idea. No, he rode a motorcycle occasionally. He didn't drive. He didn't own one, but he rode one. But anyway, and we'd been there a couple of weeks, and suddenly Saul Brodsky comes up to me at and introduces me to yet another person. He'd already introduced me a couple weeks after I got there to John Romita, who was almost faded when he realized that I'd read his Captain America comics and remembered them. And I met Bill Everett, and of course that was a big thrill to meet the creator of Submariner, character that, you know, he'd actually even created the character, and I loved his work, especially his work in the 50s, when, you know, and so forth. And when I read it later, his work in the late 30s and early 40s. And so, you know, and Saul Brodsky says to me, Bill lives up in Massachusetts, but he's going to be down here 3 or 4 nights a week, you know, go home for weekends, that kind of thing. And he needs a place to stay. So he sort of pushed me, you know, and it wasn't that hard. I mean, here's the creator of the Submariner. We have this apartment, you know, it was like a shotgun apartment. It's a room in the front, and there's a kitchen, and then there's another room. You know, the shotgun apartment, you know, that means if you stand at one end and you shoot through, you'll go through and not hit any walls, you know, or anything like that, you know. And just the 3 or 4 rooms there, not big and certainly not plush by any means. So Bill would come there, and, you know, 3 or 4 nights a week and so forth. He basically lived there. I mean, unofficially, because, you know, he wasn't on the lease. And,
now if you think,
he and Gary became drinking buddies, and he was drawing Submariner. He was drawing that first panel he did of Submariner, the splash page with the street scene. That looked just like outside our window, except for Doctor Strange being in it.
Yeah, you know what's funny? If you think about the Sanctum Sanctorum and like what that means in the Marvel universe,
yes,
the real life was even better.
Yes, that's why I love talking about it, Mr. Roy.
It wasn't quite as big.
Yeah, right, exactly. And I wanted to say, did you have the large staircase in there? But no, that's okay.
No,
and,
really,
you know, I have.
It doesn't exist anymore. Of course, they took the door. It still exists, but where that painting place was 177 Bleecker Street.
Yeah.
Our address, which was a 3 or 4 story, you know, walk up. We were on the 2nd floor.
Yes.
No elevator, nothing like that. You know, it was that was 177A. Now they both say 177. There is no more. So you can't find 177A. You can't go back to either 177A, Bleecker Street, or Constantinople because they don't exist anymore.
Or maybe they do exist, but not in this plane of reality.
Yeah, so, right.
And of course, what happened was that you know, near the end of the Doctor Strange run, I was having him get a new secret identity, you know, to become suddenly Steven Sanders. You know, it's the kind of thing they do in the new Spider-Man movie. Really, I was wondering if somebody, you know, it's almost the same thing where, you know, Doctor Strange got Eternity to, you know, change it so that everybody, you know, suddenly knew him as Stephen Strange. It was really almost the same kind of thing in a way.
Oh my!
But anyway, I'd had a telegram arrive earlier addressed to Stephen Strange at 177A. You know, at some, I didn't want to just fake it and not have an address, so I figured, well, you know, we didn't live there anymore. It wasn't going to hurt us. So I just wrote it.
Oh, I love it. Oh my goodness.
Maybe I shouldn't. We could have got in trouble. And then so that became famous as the address of Doctor Strange. And it's kind of funny because, as I said, Bill Everett, I had written Doctor Strange. Gary never did, but I had written Doctor Strange, and a couple with Ditko and would again. And you know, Bill Everett, of course, was drawing Doctor Strange at that time. So it was an appropriate thing to do.
Crazy. Go ahead, Steve. Crazy life.
All right, Roy. I want to delve into something which is actually quite controversial.
Uh-oh.
And
I didn't do it.
This is our annual episode. Go for it, Steve. Go for it.
I want to get some validation and some correction on some stuff that's been going on these last couple of years, and because you were there and you can answer these questions. About a year ago, I got into quite a debate with someone online who was utterly convinced that Stan Lee had done no writing. Okay, and what he did was he just would say to someone, okay, here's an idea. I want A and B to fight. Go ahead and do it. And the writer and the artist would do it all. Mm-hmm. And I got into, you know, quite a debate. And the example that I gave was the Silver Surfer series, which, you know, a series that was very close to Stan's heart. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like he poured everything into the story. And the reply I got was, well, we've never seen any scripts. Now,
they threw them away.
Can you
I don't have any scripts either. We threw them away.
Can you please confirm, okay, for everyone that's watching right now, okay, including Mr. Alan Moore, if he's watching, okay, that Stan actually did do some sort of typing, some sort of work, some guidance for the artist to work for.
Alan Moore is one of the great comic writers of our time. He's not stupid enough to believe this, is he?
No, he doesn't believe that Stan did anything.
Really? Oh, well, then he's full of crap, you know. Good writer as he is, he's still full of crap. You can be brilliant and still be stupid and wrong. No, Stan wrote a lot. I mean, you know, we just have those couple of examples of pages, you know, from a Fantastic Four plot. Also, is he saying that he just didn't write a plot, or because he obviously wrote a script? I saw many scripts.
There are people out there that say that Stan didn't do anything.
Well, there was a rumor at one time that Artie Simic was doing it all because Stan's name was on so many books that some people said, "I bet Artie Simic, the letterer, is right." Some of the there were stupid people with all degrees of IQ, you know, and everything, and they could believe all kinds of crazy things, you know,
and stupid biographies.
I mean, it's not that Stan eventually didn't do less and less plot writing, because, you know, he had a lot to do. He was getting involved with other things. He was increasingly called on for, you know, some of it was little personal appearances in the early days, but this is way before that because he wasn't doing that much of that then. But he was busy enough that, and he had these brilliant collaborators. I mean, Jack Kirby was, you know, a genius in his own way there, you know, for sure. And Steve Ditko, while you wouldn't have necessarily thought it before, all of a sudden, you know, he suddenly, I never saw it before and I never saw it after, quite frankly, with Steve's work. But to me, for those few years he was doing Spider-Man and Doctor Strange, except for, you know, a little bit of the Captain Atom before, you know, I've never been that impressed with Steve Ditko's work. You know, I mean, it's always been good, but I mean, his concepts, the Creeper and Hawk and the Dove, you know, I'm never going to get interested in that stuff or anything else he did. But his Doctor Strange and his Spider-Man were just brilliant. And, you know, he had some other good collaborators, Dick Ayers and Heck, that could kind of carry through. So Stan knew what these guys could do. He didn't hire people who weren't good storytellers. He didn't want somebody who needed, you know, A and B. And here he stumbled into it. It was just all stuff coming together, you know, that I could tell when I got there. You know, you could easily deconstruct how it had happened. I mean, Stan was just busy. So he lets Jack do a lot of the work. Now, I know Jack at the time didn't really mind because Jack was, you know, had been kicked out of DC and he was very happy making a living when he'd been blackballed by the biggest company in the world, you know, in comics and so forth. So, and Ditko, they wouldn't have cared to hire Ditko in that day and age, probably, you know, our hacker heirs, they weren't giving these guys any job offers, you know. And they hadn't wanted Bill Everett when Timely had collapsed before, particularly, which is why Bill left the field. You know, Marvel was just a bunch of, you know, misfits and leftovers. I mean, I was sort of one myself in a way, being thrown out at DC. And, you know, so Stan, yeah, he let Jack do a lot because Jack could do a lot. And, you know, I agree that Jack should have eventually got more money for it, but that's more between him and the publisher than Stan. Stan didn't own the company. He didn't own the characters. Maybe he could have done more for Jack. Maybe he couldn't have, you know, and everything. I certainly, you know, I know he did what he felt he could. Maybe he didn't try hard enough. I don't know. You know, certainly he was not. Stan had a lot of blind spots, you know, with all his talent. We all do. Some of Stan's were that he somehow thought that, you know, he could that if he had a little conversation with somebody, he could straighten it out, you know, so that when Jack got really upset about that article in the Herald Tribune that came out, that came out in January of '66, had been a few weeks before, and he talked to Jack and Roz on the phone, and he thinks he's got it all straightened out, and he just didn't ever recognize, you know, that it was still going to fester, you know, and everything. I mean, so that while Stan could handle those worlds, he wasn't always as skillful a master of people as he thought he was. And because in order to keep Jack happy, you'd have probably had to give him a little bit more. Because the problem wasn't really Stan, though. The real problem in original days was Martin Goodman. Martin Goodman had no concept at all that any artist was important.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, you know, when he hired Joe Simon in 1940,
yeah,
to be the editor, he didn't hire Simon and Kirby, who were already a team, right?
Right.
He didn't hire them. They were a team established, all their bylines, Jack Kirby, Joe Simon, Jack Kirby. He hired Joe Simon. Joe Simon brought Jack along because and forced Goodman to give him a staff job. Goodman just did it, you know, because you know, he's
just an artist.
He's his buddy and he's an artist, but you know, Goodman didn't see anything much in artists. He felt like, I won't say he thought they were necessarily totally interchangeable. I mean, he knew Jack was, you know, better than others. He knew the books and that, but as far as he was concerned, if he had Stan as the editor and the writer, he was in good shape, and he was worried about that. I mean, he didn't like the idea that Stan was writing all the books. That's why he got that one guy, what's his name? Leon Lazarus, to write one story. Leon Lazarus wrote for all the men's magazines and things like that. And he got him because he felt he was too dependent on Stan. He told Lazarus, he said, I want you to go in and write some stories for Stan. If Stan gets hit by a truck, I suddenly don't have a writer, And Leon wrote one story, didn't like it, and gave up, but he sort of understood that Stan was important, and Perfect Film made him understand it, because they wouldn't buy the company from him for, what was it, $13 or $14 million, unless he got Stan to sign a contract to stay. So he knew Stan was important, but see, Perfect Film hadn't said you got to also hire Kirby, and Goodman wasn't going to, and Stan just looking out for himself. He'll look out for Jack when everything's going. He looks out for Jack, and Jack got raises. He always had his higher rate than anybody at Marvel. But somehow or other, this between, the one thing I always say, the one thing about in any partnership is that each partner did 90% of the work. And if you don't believe it, just ask him. And I think Stan gave Jack more credit than Jack gave Stan, but each of them, they sort of felt like, they were
a couple absolutes you can always know. It's like when Jack Kirby was without Stan, he never achieved that type of greatness.
Some people would think, the New Gods was a nice concept.
Yeah, but not at the time. Not at the time.
Yeah.
Today they look back.
Yeah, but at the time, no, even then there were a lot of people. I mean, they didn't sell that well.
Well,
but the thing is that but people recognize that Jack, Jack was coming up with. My feeling is that Jack would not have come up with that kind of thing if he hadn't also been working with Stan for the preceding decade. So they were really much more in a symbiotic relationship than either one of them wanted to recognize. Stan liked to think that he was totally independent, and he did manage to do a lot of stuff without Jack. He could sell comics with Dick Ayers. He could sell comic with Steve Ditko. Who knew that was going to happen, right? Who knew that Spider-Man was going to become more popular than the Fantastic Four?
My thing about Stanley and Stanley and Jack Kirby, it's that I think a lot of it has become mythologized, and it's all this, and everybody tries to interpret things. But I think the biggest gripe, especially for the Kirby fans, is that Stanley lived.
I'm a Kirby fan.
No, but we were talking about this the other day. Stanley lived longer. He became more of this larger than life character. He got to enjoy these co-creations and all that. Kirby never did. He died in '94. What did he get? The X-Men cartoon. So I mean, like, there's still that like animosity there, and Stan is getting all this adulation because of all these movies and all this stuff, and he's there in it. That Jack didn't get it. But I believe if Kirby was still alive, he was a lot older than Stan too.
Several years. Yeah.
He would have gotten those cameos too. I believe he would have been there too in that. But
I think Stan would have, I think people would have offered it to him. Even if Stan hadn't done it, people would have offered it to him, because I'll tell you, maybe Martin Goodman didn't understand Jack Kirby's value. So, maybe Perfect Film and Chemical / Cadence didn't understand Jack Kirby's value, but the kind of people who started making movies in the last 2 or 3 decades about Marvel, they understood Jack Kirby's value. Maybe not some of the people that did the first Spider-Man and X-Men, because Spider-Man wasn't really a Kirby character, and X-Men was really based more on the Claremont and those guys and so forth. But once you had Marvel Studios going, all those guys, the people there, the Kevin Feige's and the people like that, they knew Jack Kirby's value independently of Stan, and it would have been nice to see Stan and Jack together in something, but Jack just didn't live long enough. Now, granted, Stan was, I really liked the man. Sometimes I almost loved him, but he looked out for number one, and he sometimes forgot who number two might be, and everything. But then, who's to say Jack was no angel? I mean, I'm not going to stand there and tell bad stories about Jack, but Jack was no angel. So I know a couple of underhanded things that he did too, but not the worst things in the world. But he was not. Neither of these guys were angels. We were just all a bunch of people trying to make a living, and sometimes they did things right and smart, and sometimes they did something stupid, and sometimes it was venal.
And they were people. They were real people. And the thing is, today it's so mythologized that you've got writers now that they have no say in anything. They're writing books. It's easy to print a book now and put it out. You got people doing that Jack Kirby book. You got those freaks for Kirby. Stan did nothing, and then you got the people that hate Stan, and you got the, like some of these biographies. They met Stan at a convention, and they signed that, and then all of a sudden they know his whole life and all. But that's what.
Yeah, but I think the main thing here is, if we want to bring it full circle, is that Roy, you saw these scripts, right? I mean, I'm dying that he threw them away, because can you imagine how much those scripts be worth?
I didn't see the plots very often, and some of those increasingly did become like just conversations over the phone and things like that, and sometimes, and a lot of times it was with a lot of the artists. Besides, well, Steve left very soon, but the other artists, Stan, what little he was doing, like with the Gene Colan, he was still writing out scripts, at least by, after I was there, because I remember a conversation. I was in the room hearing part of it. And he was very upset. I forget, I put it in alter ego. There was a story, Iron Man was a 12-page story at the beginning of Tales of Suspense.
Mm-hmm.
And so Stan had sent him a plot, it was like, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 pages, whatever like that, single spaced and so forth, for a 12-page story. But it had all the broad strokes in it. And, that was the period when Gene was taking a whole page to open a door that Stan would complain about. He said, "You open it beautifully, but it's a door," And so Gene gets to like near the end of the 10-page story or so, and Stan, I guess he sent some of it in so that Stan saw it. He says, you're taking up so much space with these big panels. You have a panel to open a door, and it's a dramatic panel, but aren't you going to run out of the room? What about this stuff that happens, near the end? And Gene says, "I haven't read that far yet." He hadn't bothered to read the whole plot, so he's just drawing along, not even thinking about the fact he's got 12 pages, and when he gets to page 8 and he's only on page 1, it never even occurred to him.
Oh my God.
So all of a sudden you've got this one story. It's one where Iron Man has to fly up, and there's a rocket and explodes, and there's like this 12-page last phase that Gene drew, and Stan had to just kill himself to write it to make it make sense, because it was such a hasty ending. And Gene was just like that. He just, he got better as he went along, but this was like still in the early first year or two.
But see, this explains my point. They were human. They were, and now they're so mythologized. We see them as these larger than life gods, and like people don't realize Kirby wasn't perfect either. Steve Ditko wasn't perfect either. Hey, Roy Thomas is alive here in the flesh.
I'm perfect, but these
but
other guys, I don't know.
But I'm just saying though, because we look at these stories and they mean so much to so many people that now all of a sudden they're in legend now. They're not, but they were real people. They weren't, and they didn't do everything that they think that they wanted them to do.
I've heard Leonardo da Vinci was a lousy dinner guest. I've heard lots of stories. But no, I mean, but Stan, first of all, I saw endless pages of actual script as far as dialogue and that stuff, because that went through our office. We saw it. The other stuff would have been if it was written out, and it decreasingly was probably, but remember Ditko, of course, had plotted his own stuff, and Stan and Romita would just talk it over at the office. He'd call Romita into his room, and Romita would sit there and take notes, but he's taking notes on what Stan wanted to do and what Romita wanted to do. Those are really stories that are co-plotted and everything, and once or twice, I remember Stan had, near the beginning, right after Ditko left in at the beginning of '66, around there, he called me in when he and Romita were going to plot out not just the next issue, but sort of which direction the strip was going to take for months, because Stan had a year or so of not controlling Spider-Man's direction, just reacting to whatever Steve did, and he liked it and he didn't like it, at the same time, because they had different ideas. He just went along with it because it was better than fighting with Steve. And so I'm sitting there, just what, and Stan saw me and said, "So you got a strange look on your face, right? What is this?" I says, "Well, I'm just thinking, this idea, you're thinking about where things are going, you're doing this and that." I said, "That's not the way I thought of comics, usually being done in the past, and everything." And he said, "Well, we just wanted to figure it out." The funny thing is, I never liked to do that myself. I always did it by the seat of my pants, just like Stan did his best days. But they had to figure out where they were going to go after Ditko left, But I didn't see a lot of writing of plots there was less and less of it, but I know that he was still writing them for Gene Colan. I don't think he did them for Dick Ayers when he was writing, when he was doing Sergeant Fury with him. In fact, Dick made up one or two of those stories practically from scratch. He tells about how Stan wouldn't give him he was upset because Stan wouldn't give him a plotting credit or something on it. And Stan,
I can't imagine John Buscema coming up and telling Stan, I've got great ideas for the Surfer.
Oh no, he never did. No, they were all Stan's ideas. Now that doesn't mean that John didn't, wasn't given a broad thing and he filled in a lot of the details. He was given something that could have made a 10-page story, and that his job was to stretch to about 30, but he did it with beautiful panels, and Stan knew to do with that.
The best panels.
And I doubt if there was anything written. There could have been something written for John occasionally. I used to write plots for John most of the time, but Stan, I think, probably didn't most of the time because, he just didn't want to. He didn't feel he needed to anymore. And once Stan had seen John and didn't like his first couple of stories from Marvel, like that Hulk and so forth, and had him work over Kirby layouts a time or two, and then toss. And he didn't. You remember, Stan didn't begin working with Buscema right away, even though he was this wonderful draftsman. He threw him to me. He said, "He's your new artist on Avengers," while Don Heck was off drawing an annual and so forth. I didn't have any choice. Turns out I didn't want a choice. Once I saw his work, And as soon as he got really good, then Stan grabbed him away from Avengers and Silver Surfer. So, but I didn't, but John just, developed in his own way. And actually Stan really did things that, in some ways hurt and infuriated John so that he hated Stan for the rest of his life, That experience over Silver Surfer #4. John remembered that to the end of his days.
I was just going to ask him that. We were going to go because you're talking about John Buscema. Roy, most collectors know, and most people who love art, Silver Surfer #4 is one of the greatest single comics ever. One of the greatest covers ever. Mm-hmm. Inside, it's just so immaculately beautiful. And the genius of Stan Lee or whatever. This is where
not apparent that day.
Right, not apparent that day. Tell us the story of Silver Surfer #4 through the eyes of Stan Lee.
What I know is, of course, I didn't see it through Stan's eyes or John's. What I saw was I'm sitting in the office. And John comes in. I don't think I necessarily knew that they were doing a story with Thor in it, which Silver Surfer goes to Asgard and all that. But John brings it in, and I guess Saul Brodsky was still, but John Reporton was probably working there. John Romita, we were fans of John's stuff, and we had loved what he was doing on Silver Surfer. Remember the preceding issue, Mephisto had been lovely too,
right?
And
crazy,
so he brings in this job and. People would want to look over Kirby's if it's Kirby, but Kirby would usually just, when he was there, would have gone directly into Stan. But, with Buscema, his work was so good. He wasn't doing Kirby type work yet. He was doing enough of it, but he had his own style, and so forth. You wouldn't have confused it with imitation Kirby like you would have a little later. So he brings in this job and we all want to see it. And John doesn't resist that, and so forth. He wasn't pushing it. And to say, that, it wasn't exactly an orgasmic experience, but it's somewhere getting up there. I mean, we just thought it was just the most beautiful stuff. Stan kind of comes out. I think he saw us all kind of, looking at it, being so impressed. And this is an account when, as it happens, by a weird coincidence, it was either that night or the next night. We had a meeting at Gil Kane's studio apartment in the city. John Buscema and I, Archie Goodwin and Gil and Gray Morrow, we were thinking of doing some kind of book with 3 different features in it. I was going to work with John, Archie with Gil, and and Gray was going to do his Orion character. I don't remember but it never went out to anything. I don't know if Stan would have raised the roof or whatever. But anyway, so this was just a day or so after. So I heard this story when it was very fresh in John's mind, and he was just so livid, and he was swearing, under and over his breath about Stan, and so forth, and how I'd like to kill him, things like that, little details. And he says, and I said, well, what happened? And I said, well, he says, I go into Stan's, and Stan takes the pages and looks over, for a couple of seconds, flips through them and so forth, because he knew John could draw like nobody's business, no question about that. And he says, forget everything those guys out there told you. He said, this is all wrong, And he says, and I'll tell you why. And he proceeded to go over it. And the funny thing is, I don't think he had anything changed But what it was is John had done his own kind of version of Asgard, and it had a little more of an Arthurian look to it. It's not quite the straight Kirby Asgard, it's a little more down to earth, but it's Asgard, but it's an Arthurian kind of Asgard. Anyway, and Stan, that and certain other things, I don't know exactly what all it was. I know that was part of it. Anyway, but he went over the whole job for like a half an hour or so, and he really demoralized the hell out. And that was the end of I never heard John say another kind word about Stan between 1968 or 69, whatever that was, and when he died in 2000 or so. Whenever I ever saw him, he never say anything.
Really quick, Stan. Can you imagine looking at those pages and then saying like raw, brand new, and saying like, yeah, this is not.
Forget what they told you. It's all wrong.
Oh my God.
Anyway, so he came out and he just, he was livid. He felt he said he felt Stan had totally destroyed his confidence. That's why I'm telling you that while Stan was like he really was one of the great editors of comics. But maybe I think he was a great editor partly because he was also the writer, and so forth. Whether he had been a great editor when he wasn't also a writer, I don't know. But but he really messed up with Buscema because there was no necessity to make John Buscema hate you for the rest of his life, over a comic book story, especially when Stan knew how well it was drawn. And he published it as far as if there were changes made, there weren't that many because it still has the same kind of Arthurian look and everything. He didn't make him redraw a huge amount of it. It was more like for the future, kind of thing. Wow. And it was just a mistake on Stan's part. But of course, the aftermath of the thing is that a few years later, 5-10 years later, when they republished it, was it one of the Simon & Schuster books?
It was in the Marvel Masterworks.
Yeah, and I guess... What was it?
It was in the Marvel Masterworks.
Yeah.
No, but I think the Marvel's Greatest Superhero Battles.
Yeah, I think it was that's printed before that. This is in the 70s. Yeah. And at that time,
where I first saw it.
At that time, Stan evidently, I don't know if he was in person, I think it called him up, but again, John told me about this later during a conversation and said that he called him up and said, but God, that story that I was looking again over that story. I said, that's one of the greatest things you ever did, and John said, John just looked at me and says, I wanted to throw him out the fucking window. He said, and John was big enough to do it, even though Stan was, he just, and the thing is, Stan had no memory at all, that I don't know if John said anything at all, but he would not have got Stan to believe that he had ever said those things about the story and that he hadn't thought it was the greatest thing in the world. But everybody else who was there at Marvel the day that came in remembered that story, not just John Buscema, but myself. And I'm sure if you had asked Marie Severin or a couple of other people there at the office, John Reporton, they would have told you, the same thing, except they didn't talk to John Buscema about it as much as I did. But, these things just happen. Something goes wrong and all of a sudden two people, and it always amazed me that Stan did such great collaborative work with guys, Wally Wood, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, John Buscema, all of whom hated him. And it wasn't just over stealing credit. I mean, John Buscema was very upset later over the How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way because the original contract sort of called for it to be like Stan's book that John just happened to be drawing, and he had to demand a read. So Stan sometimes was looking out for himself a little bit too much at the expense of others. But, on the other hand, hey, it's everybody's job to look out for themselves. John did, and he got the right credit he deserved on the book,
But regardless of the hate, though, Stan brought out, in some way, he brought greatness out of people. Mm-hmm. Like, whether it was through anger or frustration or what.
Everybody remember all the great work John Buscema did before he came to Marvel in comics? I mean, there's nothing he did nice work, but there's nothing memorable particularly.
Yeah, I mean, the greatest example, of course, is if you take a look at Strange Tales 150, you take a look at his art. And his first work, really, at Marvel. And
when it's actually over the Kirby breakdowns, you mean?
Yeah, it's actually quite wooden. It's actually quite wooden. It's just not there.
Well, he had been in advertising for a year, and one of the things about advertising is that it's such a different style that they took what he might have had at one time and took it out of it. It's sort of like when George Tuska came in and started drawing Iron Man.
Yeah.
And Stan would talk to him about the excitement and doing this and this. And George looked at him and says, because he'd been drawing Buck Rogers as a newspaper strip for a decade or so. And he said, Stan says, what you're telling me to do is everything that the syndicate has spent the last 20 years telling me not to do. He says, well, that's them, this is me. And that's the thing. It's just different standards and so forth. That what's sad about it to me is, because I had worked with John before on Avengers and loved his work, is that John, as a result, almost directly, at least largely, if not totally, as a result of that Silver Surfer #4 experience, decided to become a Kirby clone, and his work changes almost immediately. It still has the same wonderful, good drawings, but from then on, there was maybe a little less when he got to Conan and a few things, but from then on, his superhero work doesn't have that kind of grandeur and independent individual feel that his Avengers say and his Submariner that I did, and then in the first and maybe the first 3 or 4 issues of Silver Surfer.
Yes,
Sam never got another good a job out of him again after Silver Surfer #4. The rest of the Silver Surfer stuff that John did was reflecting that, and it wasn't as good.
Yes, and I think obviously if there's anyone, there's no one more perfect to answer this question or to speak to it. Is when he took over on issue 41 of Avengers, it's good work, but by the time you get to issue 50, he is flowing. I mean, I can't even imagine when you saw those finished pages what you were thinking. I mean, talk about a transition. And yes, Steve, that work that he did on the Avengers and the Submariners and those first issues of Silver Surfer, that's the height, I think, of comic storytelling.
I think the Submariner might even be better than the Avengers in some ways. Or at
Steve,
least,
I just happen to have this loaded, Steve. Check this out.
Wow.
Right there.
Yeah. Now, the thing is, I think he had seen, and I'd probably sent him that first splash page by Simon and Kirby, which has a not dissimilar pose, and everything. Not specifically for the cover, but when he was doing the story, so that may reflect it. But it has his own feel. For example, one of the things I love about that, for the inside, and then it's reflected on the cover, is that he doesn't. It was all his idea to have that one little thing. He's still kind of a muscle man, though slightly leaner muscle man. He doesn't have that kind of feel, but he's got that cape, which not many characters had anymore. But he doesn't just flow it. Once in a while he'll kind of hold it.
So it almost seems
so it's almost like drapery or something, and it becomes more of a part of it than just something hanging around behind him. And that was entirely John's instinct, that this was a different kind of character, but it became such a visual part of the character, and other people followed through on it. John had a really good sense. We always used to say when Hal Foster retired, John Cimino should take over Prince Valiant and give it some guts,
And it was funny that about when John did issue #4 of the Silver Surfer, I never thought Thor's cape looked better. That issue, for some reason, like even when he's on the ground, and it's just so magnificent, so majestic. That's the word for it. Like I never saw a cape like that. And so doing with the Vision stuff,
I was very lucky. I worked
so talented
with two at the time when they were doing, I feel, what was their best work. I was lucky enough to work with 2 of the very best artists I feel that the comics have produced, which was John Cimino and Neil Adams.
Oh wow,
okay,
that's true.
Okay,
pre-scroll war.
Mm-hmm. Oh my God!
I mean, it's amazing. You get Neil Adams, and then you get a fill-in issue or the ending of it by John Buscema, and he is drawing. He's drawing outside of himself. I mean, I was thinking in my mind, I don't know whether this is true, that John's like, oh, so Neil's pretty good, huh? But you haven't seen me. You know?
Well, I don't know, but I will. But I do know one thing. John had just a few days to do. Well, it was probably rougher pencils, and Tom Palmer had to add a little to it. But there was such a problem with the deadline on that book. Neil did start it, but by that time there had been pressure on me that I had to have John Buscema do it. I didn't want to, but I sort of had to. John Verporten, as a production manager, said, we can't wait for Neil anymore. When Neil walked in with pages, I said, I'm sorry, I can't take them. And because I'd had to call John. And remember, here's John picking up a story, except for that little chapter. He knew nothing about the story. I don't know if I had time to send him that much of it. Maybe he got it. He had to draw it in a few days, really. It was really super fast. And then it had to be shipped out to Tom Palmer, who was just really upset. At one stage, was that the time that he said that he was never gonna ink Neil because he says, I've spent the last time staying up all night because Neil can't make a deadline. Because he probably did. But the thing was, of course, Neil's work was so superlative and everything. And John did a really good job, but in his case, he's drawing it just real fast. I don't think he had time to think too much about what he was doing.
Well, okay. As we know, this is our annual. We're going a little late
How
here.
do you have an annual? You've been on 3 weeks. Okay, 12 weeks.
12 weeks. 12 weeks.
It's a quarterly is what it is.
That's a true editor right there. That's a true editor.
And how can you and the editor in chief? So
yes, exactly.
Wait till issue 36 or something.
Obviously, we're always going to have Roy back. He's our mascot. But before we go, first off, I want to say, what an interesting life. If there's anybody that needs to tell their own autobiography, it's Roy Thomas. I mean, like, he was just in the greatest moments in comics, from being a fan all the way up. But I want to do something a little fun, though, guys. Roy, you've never done this before, and this will be kind of entertaining. I'm gonna say a name. You can give me one word or a quick little quip about them.
Good at this.
Okay,
right,
no, just one word, and just with Eddie Correa. First, we'll start from the top. Steve,
is it okay with you, Steve?
Oh, sure. I'm go ahead.
All right.
Steve,
show too,
Steve Ditko. And these are supposed to be quick.
Yeah, I know. I'm not good at that. I'm awful at Wordle. It takes 5 hours to do that.
Steve Ditko.
Steve Ditko. Odd.
Okay.
Steve Gerber.
Crazy.
Jack Kirby.
Brilliant.
John Buscema.
Fantastic. I don't know.
Sal Buscema.
Very good.
Sol Brodsky.
Efficient.
Marie Severin.
A delight. That's 2 words,
okay.
still.
Whoa.
Even though she wouldn't speak to me once for 6 months, still, or 3 months or whatever it was.
Her brother, Steve.
John.
Oh, John, excuse me.
Yes.
I didn't know John very well, but what's another word for brilliant? Great. I don't know.
Great. Tom Palmer.
Marvelous inker. I need 2 words there.
All right, let's get a little more. Neil Adams.
All the words I said about everybody else that were good.
Well, let me throw in a couple of names.
Go.
Sure.
Jerry Conway.
Super facile. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way.
Marv Wolfman.
Solid.
Jim Shooter.
Next. I don't know. Tall. I could say such wonderful good things and wonderful bad things, but he's tall. I'm just trying to think of the word. To be determined.
Love it.
Determined.
That's
determined. That would be one way. There's better words, but that'll do it. And I don't mean I don't mean that in a bad way necessarily.
Yeah, and then I have one more, of course, Steve Englehart.
Oh, there's another. It's a superlative type of word, but I don't know. Steve Englehart. Singular. I could have said that about Steve Gerber too, probably, and everything, but I think that fits because it was that slight oddness. It was,
Otto, you got any names? Don't say the name.
I have one name. He's my favorite artist of all time. A young Otto got to meet him when he was 11 years old at a local comic shop, and his name is Dave Cockrum.
Dave Cockrum, yeah. Did I use inventive? Inventive would be.
No, I love that. Thank you very much
for him because he was a pretty good draftsman. Everything but he was very inventive, making up all these. I guess he had a Wolverine before I did too, although I don't remember it, And but just constantly making up all these characters that were going to be Legionnaires, and they all ended up being X-Men because DC was too stupid to put.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank God for the stupid. I mean, there were a lot of good things done by DC, and I was a DC fan too. But thank God for the stupidity that that got Jack Kirby kicked out of DC Comics, that wouldn't let Dave Cockrum do the things he wanted to do, so they came over to Marvel instead. And the comics field has been shaped by such mistakes in judgment. I'm sure Marvel has made some and sent them
I
the
just
other
got
way.
chills over that comment. That's
all right.
amazing.
I got one ready. Len Wein.
Trying to think of the word that I haven't used before, because it's certainly going to have to be good. Oh God. See how slow I am. My mind's going. It would have to be good, because he was facile, like Barb. He was could inspire. I just can't think of the right word, but I don't know, super capable. I don't know, but a little more than that, because there was some inspiration to Len too.
Okay, the last one, and last but not least,
and
I'm glad you guys didn't say this, Stan Lee. How do you wrap up
Stan Lee? Oh God, Stan, masterful. Yeah. It wasn't like he knew everything, but he could master what he needed to do, and he could wield authority when he needed to. He didn't always do it wisely, but he got wonderful work out of people. Be nice if he had managed to, to keep him able to be in the same room with him without wanting to kill him. Sometimes, even I went through spells of that. But on the other hand, hey, who knows what he thought of Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and me too? I mean, he didn't talk about it, but I'm sure, just think what must Stan have felt after Jack did the funky Flashman thing. I mean, I just know the explosions I saw. I don't know what was really, going on there. What did he think? He never talked about, all the things that Wally Wood said about him after he,
That's
left
another one.
like that.
You just said one. Wally Wood.
God, you ran out of good phrases for people. I don't know. I always thought illuminating. There was a glow about Wally stuff.
Wow.
It's those lighting effects, maybe to some extent, but just the whole thing. Of course, I like that early stuff that he hated so much, the EC, and I felt his later work, even Daredevil, and certainly the Thunder Age stuff that came later, was just a shadow of his EC work. But of course, he hated that stuff. Is there some kind of rule that says that artists have to hate their best stuff and denounce their best stuff as being crap, and keep defending the stuff they did later that's not as good? It's as if I thought, like, my favorite comic to write of all time was All-Star Squadron. I mean, bar none, before Conan, before Avengers, All-Star Squadron. If there was any book I could write for the rest of my life, Conan would be number 2, All-Star Squadron would be number 1.
Wow.
And so forth. Nothing else would be that close. But it's as if I thought that my All-Star Squadron writing was like, the best and most influential and the greatest thing I ever did. And I don't, I mean, I think the best stuff was Conan and the Avengers, and, and the best of the Marvel work was my best writing. All-Star Squadron was okay, and I enjoyed it more, but it wasn't, it wasn't as good and inspired as maybe the best of my Marvel work. Maybe inspired is the right word. I was more workman-like than inspired.
Okay, one more, a slower guy, Jerry Bales.
Well, he's, I don't know, mentor. He was my mentor, 6-7 years older than I was. But I've always been somebody. I'm not a person. I'm really kind of a second banana kind of character, and everything really. So I was second banana to Jerry on Alter Ego, and never was trying to be anything else. I didn't want to be publisher of the book or anything like that. I was second banana to Stan, and I never really wanted to. I
would say you're more the Captain Marvel Jr., because even because even that sidekick could stand on his own.
Well, okay, Captain Marvel Jr. isn't bad. Do I get to have sideburns like him and Elvis?
Okay, we'd like to thank everybody for staying for our 12th issue and having Roy Thomas, a legend.
Did we run over and you're going to have to cut this now?
We're going to.
No, this is exactly what an annual is, right? This is exactly what an annual is. This is the extra.
But I hope people out there understand how we interact with the gods with respect, but also with passion and love.
I'm a water sprite. I don't know about you.
But that's what we do. So we'd like to thank everybody for watching this. Steve, got any last words?
Yes, Roy. I know you watch our episodes, and in a future episode, I'm going to be doing a spotlight, by the way. Okay? When you came back, I'm going to be doing a spotlight on one of the most fantastic Thor epics ever done. I just want to give you fair warning. It's going to be a 75-hour episode. Is that okay, Otto?
Is that the Eternals thing?
Yes.
I like that. I like the one with I preferred the one with Red Narvo becoming Thor even more, but I did have fun with the Eternals. Marvel asked me to, to bring the Eternals into the Marvel universe, and since Jack had tried so hard to keep it out, and they wanted to bring it in, so that was my response to it. I had fun doing it.
Yes. Well, you're going to get to see me slather over those issues at some point in the future. Again, it's been an utter pleasure, and I think we really got into some great stuff in this annual, and I really do look forward to seeing you come back again, because we haven't even
and don't give
scratched
them
the
my
surface.
address. All the Kirby hate, the hate mail from the Kirby people who think that I hate Kirby or think that I badmouth Kirby just because I didn't think he.
I think what we're going to have is a series
it all
of
comes
people.
to you guys,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, basically, you're going to have validation. If you've got some 12-year-old kid in a Starbucks arguing against Roy Thomas, I'm sorry, I take Roy Thomas.
It's more like a 50-year-old geek fanboy, arguing against Roy Thomas.
And Otto, any last words from this from our annual?
No, hey guys, again, this has always been fantastic, Mr. Thomas. It's always been great to hang out with you and listen to your stories. And from a true fanboy,
Mr. Thomas was my grandfather.
Oh, I'm sorry, Roy. Okay, I apologize.
Well,
from a true fanboy, when you signed my, when you took time out of the show at that show to sign my T-shirt, which I still have, and I love it to death. And it was just always been a pleasure. And when you came on 3 Men in a Basement in Rhode Island and gave us that time, just more talk to hear this has just been fantastic. And I know my partner Roger would love to be here, but he's out with his significant other celebrating Valentine's Day. But again, on behalf of 3 Men in a Basement, we appreciate all the time that you give us, that you've given us in the past and hopefully in the future. So thank you very much.
So many stories. I'm running out,
No, I got.
He's got to put that story to paper. So thank you guys. Steve in the Cimino Says Boom podcast. Thankfully, we make the 12. We got 100 more, Roy, and we're gonna make sure we bring our mask.
I'm gonna be on 50 of them.
Yeah. So Steve, get us out of here.
Okay. Boom.
Boom.